Hi, everyone. Welcome to SPED Homeschool Conversations. We are so glad you are with us tonight. Again, we are talking about communication. That is our topic of the month for October 2019. And we just want to thank you for joining us in these conversations we're having. And also just for bringing your questions, bringing your comments, especially if you're live. We love that. Even if you're watching on a recorded session or on our podcast, send us your questions. Send us the things that we can pass on to our guests, or that we can answer on our YouTube channel. We'd love to do that. So tonight our topic specifically is helping young adults with autism how to recognize and communicate their emotions. And our guest tonight is Dr. Erika Olimpiew. Welcome, Erika. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Hi.
We're happy to have you here and to be able to share on this topic, because I think we get really stuck. Well, communicating with teens in general is just a really difficult thing. And then communicating with teens who have autism and just don't navigate communication that well on their own. And then we as parents kind of feel like we're at a loss. So I'm excited with what you have to share tonight with us, and maybe to open some new understanding on how to connect with these young adults, that sometimes it's easier to sometimes avoid the conversations, but that's not the thing we should be doing, should we?
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah. Oh, I was just going to say, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, and why this topic is important to you, and just maybe a little bit about your background? That would be a great way to get started. Yeah.
So why this topic is important to me? So I've been working as a catechist with actually teaching children the special needs for over 20 years at a local church. And now these children have grown up, and I'm friends with some of the parents. And also over time, I became interested in the idea of emotions, just because emotions are so important for decision making, for even more important than, say, learning a skill like like learning a programming language. Because in my field, I'm actually a software developer, a software engineer. So I'm not a doctor and a psychologist. So I'm a doctor in information technology. And in my field, it's very supposedly rational, and you're supposed to have things, the emotions are supposed to be separate. And actually through my career, I mean, when I worked, it was just so much more important how somebody felt about you, so they can work with you to build a project together.
Relationships are so important in the workplace.
And people are like, if they don't like you, they don't give you a project, or you don't get promoted. So it's even more important, like how you communicate with others, and how you understand emotional context of the situation when you are in a job, that you think it has nothing to do with emotions. Actually, there's a lot. So it's a team building. It's just something I learned over time, and then I thought, well, why don't I combine this idea? How emotions are so important. And now I'm looking at helping young adults with autism, because it's something that's so difficult for some of the high functioning young adults with autism, to just communicate how they feel to others and to understand how others feel. And even myself, I have a little hard time understanding how others feel. So it takes me a while to process somebody else's emotional response to the situation, especially I don't see their face because I'm a visual person.
Right.
So if I don't see it, like if I'm not right there, it's a little harder for me. So I kind of identified with it too. So that's why I'm kind of passionate about helping them, because he helps me too, helps everyone. So that's why.
Exactly. Yeah. I was reading through your slides ahead of time, and you, being an engineer physicist myself, I love how what we're going to talk about tonight, you broke it down into some very quantitative steps, and, just into that, it's making relationships make sense and kids that are on the autism spectrum tend to like processes and steps and methodologies, and so I'm excited with what you have to share tonight, because it translates very well to someone who finds security in in, I guess, just, this is the next step, or this is why this is happening, and this is ways that we can work on making something that seems so untangible tangible.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So if you're watching us, we're happy you're with us tonight. We definitely want you to be part of this conversation. So make sure you put your comments and your questions in the feed as we're going along. And should we just get started with the slides and dive in?
Yeah, I think so.
All right. So I'm going to bring that up, and yay, it came up in the right place. So again, yeah.
I'm going to talk about some practical strategies for teaching emotion identification, communication, regulation for young adults with autism. And why I say practical? Because while I was going through a lot of literature of these past couple of years, I see that some of the strategies are actually not practical. They're done in labs, they're not done in the real world, and it's hard to scale. Like, you can't scale some of the studies, even though they might be helpful in that particular situation. They're not scalable in the long run, and sometimes because they're tied to specific technology, and sometimes it's because just the interventions are too much. It's just too complicated to set up and to reproduce for somebody who doesn't have the exact same computers, exact same technology or lab that some university does. So these are more things that you can do on the fly, and that I've learned over time as a catechist. How to be really flexible with adapting activities on the fly for children with special needs. So and now I'm going to make it more for the young adults. So it's going to do things like career, getting a job.
Yes. And that's so important. It's something that we talk less about, and really that transition, we launch them into these places and don't have them prepared for those situations like you were talking about, the job situations, and trying to read people, and why is this not working out? Definitely, because there's so many team-oriented jobs now. But I love that it's practical, because we find this in general in the homeschooling realm, is that there's lots of methodologies made for classrooms, but yet when you move it to the homeschool room, it doesn't usually work. So at least as well. So you kind of have to adapt and modify it. So all right. So should I head on to the next slide?
Yeah, go ahead. Next slide.
Okay, so we're going to talk about emotion identification. Let's see if I can center that correctly. There we go.
So these are from studies and papers that show that the greater your vocabulary, the better you identify emotions. It's better for you to, you can, like, the vocabulary matters a lot, like when you're talking about emotions. And sometimes it's hard because there's so much information coming from the face and from the body language at once. It can be really overwhelming for actually anyone to process all at once, but some people can do this better than others. And some of the ways that the parents actually have told me that, when their child help recognize emotion would be like watching soap operas or watching like Disney movies or something that's a little bit less detailed, but it kind of conveys emotion like in an exaggerated form.
Oh, an exaggerated, yes.
Yeah, so the exaggeration and this sort of the animation of characters, or in the comic books too, like exaggerate the emotion, the anger, and that's easier to understand and to detect. And then, but then you have the also there's another thing that I read recently, a book by Fagin. He's a comic, he's an artist. And he wrote a book on how to draw emotions in the faces and how to detect the very minute details, from how you're shaping your eyebrows to different types of muscles. And he goes into so much detail on step-by-step instruction that actually makes it easy to understand, and how you can tell between some very slight variations in emotion that it's, it could be helpful for somebody who learns by actually looking, here are the exact steps on how to identify somebody's facial expression. Exactly. So you can actually just describe it, and and it's another way to learn, how by maybe copying some facial expressions and just looking at comparing the details on them. And I think I have
so many things involved in just one facial expression, and there are people that are very good, and that it's almost like a gift that they can read expressions. And then, for especially, autism type of spectrum issues that have those communication issues with relationships, they're so very difficult to get all those details into one understanding. So that's wonderful that, thinking of an artist and how they would break down all those pieces, that
Right.
to have a listing like that of this is where the eyebrows would be. I can see how that would make a lot of sense to someone who wanted to understand it from more methodical point of view versus a relational point of view.
Yes, and I have the references in the last slide, so the actual book title that
Oh, awesome. And probably I'll share all the links on the YouTube video, and also once we get done, I'll copy and paste the links into this feed as well, so you guys can just click on those. That'll be great.
Okay.
Awesome.
So the next, yeah. So emotional communication. So this is another thing we take a lot for granted. So there's the interaction between two or more people. So when we talk, there's usually a weight associated with a conversation. So this is called like Talk With Me. So there's a book called Talk With Me that describes like how to balance a conversation, balance asking questions. So she talks about the conversational framework. Balance asking questions, identify the weight of a conversation. Is it serious? Is it light in tone? So what's the weight? So and then you make appropriate questions or comments. And then the topic, identifying the topic, not to go away from the topic. So in in this conversational framework, they do practice sessions with groups of people. And then she would interject if somebody strays from conversation. Okay, what's the topic? So there will be prompts made by the facilitator during the conversation to keep somebody on track about the topic, the weight of the conversation, and the balancing of the questions. So they get points for. I'm not sure how she does the point system, but how many questions you ask. So it measures it, and then you can
that are on
your conversation is balanced or not. Yeah, but it involves practice. So a lot of these things involve basically practice. Practicing it with different kinds of people in different situations. And this, if you practice it, enough, it helps you to learn the skill, because it's actually really hard to learn a new skill and to change your behavior. It's very, very hard. But you can do it through consistent practice. In different situations over time. Yeah.
Well, and just being encouraged. I mean, that's when you start out, and I know my son on the autism spectrum, and a lot of kids who struggle, with autistic tendencies. Perfectionism is one of those things that if they don't get it right the first time, oftentimes they just want to give up. And to just be encouraging, well, look at this step. This one thing that you did right. So a reward system, I could see how that would be very beneficial to have.
Yeah. So after the communication, so there's something called the emotional regulation processes. And this is a work based on Gross's model, where he read like over 100 papers on how people identify and process emotions from different fields. And he came up with this process that basically has couple of steps. So the first one, we can actually create our emotion, believe it or not. We can create, and we can kind of, in a way, we have some control over what the final outcome is.
Right.
Because emotions are created by the brain, right? So it's like thoughts are created by the brain, emotions are created by the brain, but they're also a very ingrained primal, I would say, it's almost not exactly instinct, but it's hard to, for people to understand and to control it. So anyways, what his process is, you got this thing called situation. It's situations antecedent process, where you can select the situation that benefits you. You can modify the situation. So this is all controlling your environment, because the environment has an influence on what kind of emotion you're going to have.
Right.
So depending on the situation you select. So let's give an example, like we're going to talk about somebody with sensory difficulties. You don't like a lot of noise, you don't like a lot of people, and you're going to look for a job that's going to fit your profile. So what kind of job is going to not have a lot of people around all the time that you're going to have to be talking to? Well, software engineering, but maybe
all those engineers, they hide out.
It's something you can do on your time, mostly individual, and nobody's going to come and bother you and ask you to go to meetings all the time. Well, not all the time, sometimes, right?
Right.
But you can sort of think about your profile. So the more you understand yourself, the more you can understand how you are and what you like and what you don't like. So that has to be your preferences and your abilities and your sensitivities. So when you understand that, you can choose, I'm going to try this particular situation. So each situation selection. Now, we have some control over situations, but not all of the time. And also sometimes you might want to expand your reach. So you don't want to always pick things that are always comfortable for you. So this is a danger. Nothing's perfect, right? So if you always pick something that's comfortable for you, you never try something that's a little bit different. You might just get isolated, right? Well, I like being by myself, but should I always pick something that's all by myself all the time? Shouldn't I try talking to people sometimes, going inside my comfort zone? And how do I do that in a way that doesn't doesn't
almost create a challenge for yourself? I know when I struggled with relationships, that would be something I would say, okay, Peggy, when you go into a group, you're going to sit with people you don't know, and you're going to force yourself to start a conversation. And that opened, it made me feel more comfortable the next time I did it.
Yeah, so you do a challenge, like I'm going to talk one person a day, something like that. Or I'm going to do like one thing that I normally don't do, every week. I'm going to go to a new place that I'm not used to. I'm going to meet a new person. I'm going to talk to them. So you make these little goals to make yourself get outside of that comfort zone in order to expand your reach, because it is important for people to do that. So that's another thing with autism, and also people with social anxiety or who are introverts. It's hard for us to go outside of that comfort zone.
Right. But again, back to what you were talking about before, practice. The more you practice, you're going to build self-confidence, and you're going to say, oh, that really wasn't so bad. I can do this. And then it just builds upon itself.
Right. Yeah. And the next step is, okay, once you get a situation, you can actually modify the situation. So this has to do, let's say you go to let's say you get you're in a classroom, the classroom's noisy, the teacher can tell the students to calm down, or maybe the light's too bright, you can turn the light off. And in some ways you can modify your situation to a certain extent to kind of make it better for you, or add like a place that's quiet, a place, have more choices, so when I was a teacher, I used to give choices to people. I mean, you can, study from home, you can come to class, you can have choices in where you're going to be when you're attending the class, because that gives people more flexibility and also it's more comfortable for them.
Right. Yeah. I think that you almost have to give somebody permission when there's the anxiety is so high in a situation to even think, I can change some things within this sphere, that I don't have to function exactly as it's set up. I can ask to say, can you turn that fan off? It's bothering me. Right. Or can we dim the lights? And you have the ability to ask for those things. And so to just even, to tell young adults as you're working with them, these are, just because a room is set up this way doesn't mean that you have to tolerate it if you can't. If it's, bothering you so much, you can speak out and at least say, could we please? And more than likely people want to accommodate that.
Yeah, so the idea of asking for an accommodation suits you, but though everything, like I said, is not perfect. So, I mean, if you ask for accommodation and maybe the teacher can give it because it'll bother somebody else, like if you ask to turn lights down, maybe somebody can't see as well. So that's something that like the teacher would have to consider, or the workplace, you might want to ask for a different place to sit, but maybe there's no available extra, offices. So these are things where flexibility, and I think when employees do this, like workplaces where you can have different options, you can have a room that's, closed, you can have an open space, you can have that makes it better for employees. Right. Because you give that flexibility. But anyways, so that's another thing. So next step is, once you can, let's say you can't select it. You can't modify situations. What can you do next? So the next step, you have the situation, or you modified it to the extent you could. It's called attentional deployment. So that's putting your attention in something that interests you. And we have a actually called distraction, concentration. So that's your attention. Where are you going to focus your attention on? And you could be, some people can be in a crowded room and read a book, and they're, totally into that book, and they're going to forget everybody around you.
Right.
People can play music, and that's something that, or listen to music, and then attention would focus to that. And with young adults autism, you get autistic obsessions, or things that you really like to do, and that kind of can take that attention and focus it in one topic, and kind of the world around you is going to be gone. So like I said, it could be good or bad. It's good if it's kind of helping you in some way. I mean, if you're reading a book while the teacher is trying to teach you, something else, and you're paying attention, that might be something that's not useful for you, right?
Right.
But it could be made, it could benefit you if you find, for example, that you want to learn a new skill, or if you're a teacher, you're teaching somebody a new skill, and you can find, like, let's say you want to go shopping, you find what that person likes to shop. So if they like to shop for clothes, maybe you would pick a clothing store to practice that skill in. If they like to shop for, video games, you pick that topic. So the topic can be used as a way to help you learn a new task. If you're
like a bridge. So you're bridging the topic that they focus on with maybe some activities that may be uncomfortable.
Yes. So that would be a bridge, because you're in a more comfortable activity that you enjoy, and then that could help you to learn something else that's a little more difficult for you, or that you're more afraid of. So that's a bridge.
Right. Yep. We've talked about this as homeschoolers, and I know my son really tested me on this one, because his calming thing is video games. And I could not figure out how this child could play a video game and write a paper at the same time. But he actually does better when he has the video game and he writes the paper, because it calms him, and then he thinks of something and then he writes it down. And he got A's in English in college by doing that. And so, but it's, again, one of those things that I think we've talked about in the past on our show, is that parents, like you talked about music, or, books or things like that, test it out, have your child do it with or without, and see how it goes. And if that, that situational modification, that thing that you add in, like Erika's talking about, works, don't take it away. It helps.
So the next step, okay, let's say you attentional deployment. So the next step, you get the, it's called a cognitive reappraisal. And this has to do with a cognitive change. That's something like, you can't change the external environment anymore. So now we're looking at changing, like, first what you focus in, your internal state, right? Your focus. So the next thing is reappraising. So this has to do with when you hear something. Let's say a teacher gives you a critique on a test, or you get a bad grade, or something that you didn't expect. You got a B and you expect an A or a B minus. So the first thing people think, most likely is going to be negative, right? Like, I'm not a smart person. Yeah. But with cognitive,
we're really good at that.
Cognitive reappraisals, and this is something, an idea that I really like from this book by Jennifer McIlweeMyers. So she thinks again, think of 10 reasons.
A little more to the side. There you go.
Yeah. So this one. So she says a way that she handles this is, she thinks of 10 reasons. Again, let me think of 10 other reasons why this might not be the case. Or, so look at the situation 10 different ways. Or play a game of how many reasons you can think that this might not be true. And this is also like Carol Dweck's idea with the mind growth mindset, right? So it could be that, hey, maybe the grade is like this because, didn't read the material, or maybe the teacher didn't explain in a way that was, that I could understand, or maybe it was something that, I was missed, but if I read it, I can try again, it'll be better. So the idea of trying again from a different perspective, or maybe looking at it from a different point of view, or maybe just I don't know. It's not you. It's well.
There's so many external factors, and I think our first reaction, it's naturally human to blame ourselves that that I am just awful. I mean, that's the natural go-to, and that, my son calls me all the time, when he gets bad grades, and this is what I walk him through. and as a parent, you almost have to do that and point out those things if they can't see them themselves, and just say, like you said, and oftentimes I'll say to them, in the long run, what is this one grade going to matter? Because it was a test within a class, and you're going to learn from it, and you're going to move on, right?
All tests are made by individuals, right? So from that particular teacher's perspective, and that particular slice of material that didn't necessarily cover every single thing that's in the book. So it's not like the test is a measure that's, worldwide. It's going to be the same, but it's a specific measure.
Be tattooed on you for the rest of your life. Yeah. That's kind of what they think sometimes, and I totally get it.
So the idea that your mistakes are terrible, or over, how do you say, making it seem more terrible than it really is. So the executive elevating it, as opposed to looking at it in context of a wider view. Yeah. And this is, I think she explains it. This is why I want to say it again, because she explains it really well, how she handles it.
Let me read that for our podcast listeners. It's how to teach life skills to kids with autism or Asperger's.
Yeah, and she herself is Aspy, so she talks about from her point of view and what her parents did to help her, and what actually didn't help as well. Which and in particular, the thing about making mistakes and cognitive reframing, cognitive behavioral therapy, she talks about how it helped her. So I just really recommend it for people. It says for children, but it could be for adults too. It's like
you carry those traits on. If you don't deal with them as a younger child, you'll carry them into adulthood, and
you stay with it, and it's worse.
It becomes just the way you mentally process things, and if you don't change it and you methodically work on changing it, it's going to stay that way.
Yeah, but the positive side is you can work on methodically changing it. You can change it.
Exactly.
It's not like a brain. You're not a fixed. You're not a rock. You're so you have that capability. Neuroplasticity
that we have.
Yeah. So this, and she talks also about like doing the same activity when she was learning how to use money, with paying for a credit card. How her parents are like, credit card, you can only spend as much as you actually have money to back it up. But her parents would say the same lesson every time, but they would go to different stores and then different times. And they did it often enough that it became more of a generalized concept as opposed to a specific situation. Just in this particular credit card.
Exactly. So that's something that in general, that generalization of a concept, children on the autism spectrum or even adults have a really hard time with. Do you want to talk just a little bit about that? What that involves?
So that's but actually from the time I spent being a catechist for 20 years, teaching like how to receive the Eucharist, and which is pretty much the religious rituals, a very specific set of steps. You have to follow in this order, and you have to understand the meaning of what's the bread and what's the body of Christ. So I spent a long time teaching children with special needs this, and I found that if you practice it a lot, like every time we practice it in different situations, we practice it in the classroom, we practiced it in the chapel was empty, and it would just have to, with different objects, like makeup, toy, I don't know, bread, whatever. And then, and I think eventually it got to the point where they became very comfortable with it. So when they had to go to actually receive the Eucharist with their families, I would say most of the children, not all of them, were able to do so. But that's after maybe a year or 2 years of practicing this. And it takes some time. But it could be for other types of skills that are like, and I think, and I don't want to say this, make it trivial, because it's not, when you're learning a life skill, it's very hard. I mean, applying for a job, it's a lot more than just certain steps, because it's more complex.
Yes.
So so that kind of requires, I think, it's more again, real life practice in a group setting, but in a way that it's not going to be so intimidating to you. You're never going to do it again. Like
Right.
so your level of fear, trying
Mhm.
the situation and the things that you're going to do new, you have to be very careful how you balance that or plan it out, so it doesn't
Right.
overwhelm you. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and when you're working with young adults who are stepping into those new arenas, just to help them be okay with trying and not succeeding, but learning, like you had been talking about earlier, is that, it wasn't a failure. There's things to take away. There's things to learn. And that's hard because they think when they apply for their first job, they're going to get it. When they work at their first job, that everyone's going to love me, because maybe they did at church, but maybe they don't at your job. And
Dealing with the setbacks and that's hard. That's hard for anyone. But
it is.
But it's kind of understanding, like, when you make a mistake, that's really an opportunity to learn. And when somebody says no, they're putting a boundary on you, but that means, hey, now you have one less thing to worry about. You got all these other options you can try. So it's something that, you can, and even for me, who likes being told no, or you can't do this, but it's a good thing, actually, when somebody tells you no, or when somebody says the truth to you, which a lot of people don't. It's much better, like today's talk, somebody says, it's much better to get a no than a maybe. No is the second best option. The first one's a yes. Second one is the no. The third one's maybe is the worst, because you don't know. You keep hanging on, like hoping things are going to change, and that's actually not a good thing.
Right. Yeah. That's
so learning how to handle rejection is hard. Yeah. For everybody, but it's, especially if you're perfectionist, or you want to think
we often talk about how hard sometimes things are. If we plow through them, we plow through them, and we don't talk about the struggles that we have inside. It's just when we do good, of course it's all over social media. Look what I did. Look at all of this stuff, and that's all we see of somebody's life. And yet the times when they do get no's, when they struggle with maybes, when they're in situations that are difficult, we don't talk about them. And I think as a parent, I almost want to talk about those situations with my children, because I want them to know that it's not always easy. So
one of my favorite writers is Jack London, and he wrote the book called White Fang. So it's about a wolf. I used to like thinking about wolves, and he, before he got this book published, I think he had like 100 no's. I mean, he tried. He had so many revisions and to get his book published. And I guess a more contemporary version of this, like Apple, it took them 10 years to get the first iPhone out. So nobody talks about the research that went on before. They look at the end result. Like all of a sudden they came up with this new idea, iPhone, but it was actually 10 years in the making. So you don't look at the work that was there before to get to that point where somebody can, create a new invention or sell a new product. And it happens a lot with, I guess, the world. Everything seems so quick, social media, everything's happy. You don't show before how you got there, but
Well, and as we're talking about communicating emotions, isn't it important that we set the right framework for how to communicate emotions? And yes, I'm frustrated, but how am I dealing with that frustration? What are my outlets for that frustration? And in making it evident, and walking young adults, walking alongside them through those things. How do we process everything that is going through your head? I know you talked about some of this already, but just reframing it in the right context and having somebody that you can bounce those things off of is so important.
Yeah, and this is like counselor might be helpful too, like having somebody who's trained in cognitive behavioral therapy or trying to help the person like to process, how their thoughts are and just have a check. Is this real? Am I okay? Because sometimes you don't know. But if somebody, you could check against somebody who's objective and who's going to say, well, that looks okay. Well, no, why don't you look at this evidence, and kind of give you more like, look at the evidence, try to compare it. Is this really true that, that person really hated you just because they frowned? Maybe they had a bad day. Like they can give you alternative points of views that you didn't consider. And that would be a helpful, like a guide, to kind of check in with every once in a while.
Yes.
And and then and the idea of having this framework that I'm creating is more for, okay, we have this framework, so now we can develop lesson plans, apps, whatever it is that would fit. So because a lot of times, how do you incorporate like emotions in a lesson plan, But if you can have a framework or templates that can help you get started, you can copy, like I created a shopping plan, but you can do some other thing. You could be for a job interview. You could do it for, I don't know, going out to eat in a restaurant. So just the idea of having something that you can kind of follow structure and just having it, you adapt it for your needs, in your situation, for your child or your student. And then I'm planning to build it out a little more. It's still in the beginning stages, but just have.
Why don't you talk a little bit about what you're doing in Erika's company, Emotive Solutions? I think I didn't write it down.
This was an emotive learning platform. So basically, any platform. So I'm going to make available like lesson plans, apps that can, and also enable people to build their own. So this is one of my future goals. Maybe high functional young adults with autism who can code could help build out their own apps and get paid for it. Maybe have a way to monetize it and eventually, I don't know, just help yourself, like becoming self-aware.
Right, because it doesn't seem odd when a teenager or a young adult has a phone in their hand, and if their phone is telling them, okay, this is the next step in how you communicate with somebody, you wouldn't even think twice about it.
Right. Or here's I tell the chat app, this person said, I don't like what they said, and then the app could be like, well, maybe this is why, kind of function as an intermediate counselor.
Yeah.
But there are apps that actually do that, but having a way that you can have a say in how it's going to be structured, especially for it as an educator, what kinds of things would you like it to say to this person? But it's in the future. This is the beginning, so I'm going to have to still work on creating. I'm trying to create an app. First.
But I know you do help parents to kind of navigate this and set up lesson plans already.
Yeah. So I do this with a few parents. So we make up an idea. Let's go shopping. So I did or go to restaurants. We did that. And the next thing I'm going to try to do is make an app because one of our young adults, she's very artistic. So I say, oh, it's beautiful. She does these beautiful drawings. And I said, well, you could draw something. You could create, like maybe could use your drawings inside an app, and you could put it on an app store or in a maybe how to, I think we're trying to think about a way to veterinarian, how you become a vet or what kind of things veterinarians do. Something that's of interest to you or to her,
Right. So, going back to that bridging.
Yes.
That you can build in a lot of lessons into something that they're already comfortable in and take them kind of out of their comfort zone in other areas like relationships and other scary situations in life.
Yeah, so that's my next project, is creating this app with her, and hopefully it'll work out. If not, well, it's a trial, so we'll see. I think she has some really artistic talent, and it'll be useful to see what we can do.
Yeah, well, that's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the weight of conversations, because I think, I remember when my son was young, and a lot of kids on the autism spectrum, when I've had conversations with them, they like to talk about the subjects that they like to talk about. And it's if you're having a conversation about something else, they always bring it back to that without even realizing that they do it. And the process of going through and working towards, without beating them down, this is what you're doing. But we want you to be part of a larger conversation, and bridging that into, yes, you love to talk about these things, but other people love to talk about other things. Do you have any tips for parents on how to go about, I guess, helping a child realize that this conversation, is one-sided right now, and it needs to be two-sided.
The parents that come to my class, they do that a lot. They tell their children, now we're going to talk about this. We'll talk about this other thing later. And actually, the children listen. I mean, if you're very specific about what the topic is, like we're going to talk about this topic, it's going to be Eucharist, I get to teach Eucharist. So we got to talk. They want to talk about dinosaurs or Legos or something, or their Minecraft or video games. So the parents themselves, they know their children very well. They tell, no, you're going to talk about this when they're there with the class with me. And I have to do the same. So I have to copy them because, so I kind of actually, when I see the parent doing this, like I try to copy them because they're right. Okay, let's focus your attention now. Let's go here. And sometimes you have to keep prompting, but I think it's just being very specific about what they have to do at that moment and clear the directions. And one thing that actually McIlweeMyers mentions too, don't use the abstract language or things like, well, like very vague terms that are not going to be understood by somebody with autism. Use a very specific thing. Say, no, we're not going to talk about dinosaurs right now. We're going to talk about the Eucharist because this is why we're here. We're going to learn about the Eucharist. Or we're going to learn about math, if you're talking about math. You only have this much time to learn about math, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this particular problem. So just very specific and straightforward, not like vague, oh, maybe we shouldn't be talking about this. No, don't say that. Just say, we're going to do this right now. Very specific and direct. Yeah.
Yeah. And if they're used to being redirected and brought back, and that's very helpful.
And Talk With Me, that conversation framework book that I mentioned, is called Talk With Me. So she gives actually really specific templates of how to do this type of conversation in groups and what kind of prompts to give to people. So she also has on the right, like, these are the kinds of prompts. and she describes example situations and the kinds of prompts that were used in those example situations. So it's very specific.
That would be. If
you wanted to get started in something, it would be good to use that.
Yeah, because sometimes, you feel like you're repeating yourself and you're a robot. Get back on the subject. let's talk about this. And if there's some other ways to
use visual prompts. I mean, you don't have to. Sometimes a visual prompt can be done. So she actually talks about using visual prompts and words. Like when they're doing topics, they put a list of words on a poster board. So if you say it's no topic, you just point to the word, like, here's a word, or you do some other, and then everybody can look at that, so it's a visual cue, a word with a picture. So she does talk a little bit about that.
So you're going to talk a little bit about response modulation too.
All right, that's the last part. I forgot about that. So that's an emotion in that process, emotion regulatory process that James Gross described. So the last part is the one that most people are probably familiar with. It's response modulation. It has to do with, you have the emotion already. What do you do to modulate it? Make it less intense or more intense. So this is like, for example, if you are really angry, how do you tone down your anger? Or if you're really sad, or how do you make it relax?
Yes.
But people do this with like meditation, exercise. It could be done with drugs. Some people they take anti-anxiety medication or other kinds of medications. So that's another way that people deal with that. But that's at the very end. So I think the more impact, like the earlier in the process that you can change the situation, and then also the feedback loop. So once something doesn't work out for you, just try it again. That situation didn't work out for you. You tried it, you picked it, you made all the modifications, this happened. So it's like a learning loop. You come back to the beginning again. You always get to come back to the beginning, right? Wake up every day. You kind of get that chance, Groundhog Day type. But But modulation is the last part of the process. That's like the one that most people are familiar with, like going to a quiet room, you're already overwhelmed,
Right. That's when you've already tipped the scales and now you got to deal with it.
You already have the emotion. So now what do you do? So that's something that I think most of the efforts focus on that last piece of the process, but you can actually go earlier.
Right. And we've talked about just, practicing and observing and teaching a child or a young adult how to observe the different expressions and how to read them and all of that, as well as just practical ideas on how to go through topics. I love that, the weight of a topic or the subject of a topic, and pointing out those specific things, because oftentimes there's so much anxiety overwhelming you that you don't even think about all of those little nuances in the topic. It's just, I have to speak. I have to respond to this.
Right.
And what am I going to say? And so I think that, that's why they tend to go back to the subjects they're comfortable with, because the anxiety about how do I make up something on the fly to fit into this conversation, it's so very difficult. But,
and one of the things that Talk With Me talks about is like, you actually practice it in real time so that you understand, because sometimes if you slow down the process, it's not realistic. It's kind of like if you're practicing karate or something and you're doing a very slow motion moves where you're going to fight, you have to go very fast, right? And you have to only spot. And it's totally different when you're doing it like on the spot and you have dynamically practicing a set of moves and you're like, you got to do this way, this step first, the next step. So it's the same thing with a conversation. You can you practice it, but in real time. And then she talks about how to do that. Actually, it's 3 authors. So they talk about how to do this type of practicing in real time in small groups. And then she talks about identifying the topic. That's the first step. Then the second step is the identify the topic and the weight of the conversation. And then practicing the appropriate balancing the conversation. And then the last thing is the asking questions. I don't have the book with me, but I try to remember. But there's 3 steps to the process. Yeah.
Right, because you want to engage that person more. And so you don't want to just end it with your comments. You want to then move it back to them. And how do I do that?
Oh, bridging the topic. That was the last one. I just remembered it. Yeah. So the last step is bridging the topic. Like you're finishing with a topic. How do you bridge it to another topic? That was the last part.
Oh, yes.
Because you don't want to talk about the same thing, right?
Right. Because you can run out of that one thing really fast. And now how do we move our conversation on? Well, and I've told this people with even video. A lot of people say, well, I when they first start doing videos is I'm going to just use a script. I'm going to make a video. And the problem is when you do that and you're not live, you can stop the camera at any time. And so it almost trains you to not be as responsive as you would on live video. You just have to do it. And you have to fail. And you have to just be willing to say, this is what it is. And our kids have to do the same thing, these young adults, to get out into life. It's going to be a lot of stumbling and coming alongside them and saying, it's okay, you're learning and you're getting better. And yes, we may get to those points of that modulation at the end where we go, okay, where's your quiet space? How do we regroup?
Yeah, and then to quote the Vincent van Gogh, if you hear a voice that tells you you're not a painter, then by all means paint. And that voice will be silenced. So actually just do it. Whatever it is that you're afraid of, that you don't want to do, maybe, try it. And you don't have to try it all at once. Like you don't have to jump in the deep end of the pool, jump in the shallow end.
That's a very good point.
You can make your situation, and you have some control over that. What kind of situation you can pick to test your experiment in, right?
Yes.
So if you want to, let's say you're afraid of, I don't know, I picked dancing. so don't go to a dance with a bunch of people. Go in a small setting, maybe with a private instructor or somebody who's who's going to teach you slowly, Or let's say you want to do something new that you never tried before, like, I don't know, let's see, driving. And not everyone can drive, but some people can. So how do you learn how to drive in a safe setting? Well, normally you don't go out and maybe you don't go out in the middle of the road. We're not busy traffic.
You go in a parking lot.
Yeah. And
Exactly.
then you practice there with somebody who you can trust, who's going to feel comfortable with you making mistakes in a parking lot, right?
Yeah, there's less to hit there, usually,
Yeah.
if it's an empty parking lot.
So it's just that idea, but you have to keep trying, right? And then maybe graduating to more, if you're still interested in whatever it is that you want to do, the goal.
Right. Well, and we're reframing this back into young adults who are going out into the job force, who are maybe going into a college setting, who have been home in their homeschool. And these are huge changes, huge steps. And launching them and just saying, well, you've got it, is not enough. And working through all of these social nuances, the emotional nuances that they've never been exposed to, and to work on a plan, you transition plan for high school students with their academics and with so many other things and life skills. But what about their emotions and their relationships? And I just love that, that's how we started this conversation of you talking about we've got to prepare them for success in these environments that they're not used to.
And sometimes that might require a mentor, or sometimes I think that George Mason has called a Massey program, and they do provide somebody with it gives you one-to-one assistant for special needs, like a kind of a mentor or somebody you can check in with or can give you some guidance.
Great.
So some schools have that, universities, because I'm a university professor, so I teach also software design. But it could also be a mentor, a counselor, or somebody you can always go back to and check in. I think that's just very helpful, because it's helpful to have that voice who's not you and who's not somebody who's your family member who you might not be comfortable sharing stuff with.
Yeah.
Kind of say, hey, is this okay? Or
well, and I even found when we got to be good friends with two other families who had one child that was on the autism spectrum, and my son, my oldest, was on the autism spectrum, but my second wasn't, but he sure understood his brother. So in this other family, his best friend was the child on the autism spectrum. And so they would often talk when his friend is in college about these social situations. So sometimes it may just be a really good friend who has a sibling with the same struggles. They surely do understand.
I mean, it could be a friend. I mean, yeah, it could be a friend. But I'm just saying, not everybody has a friend that they could talk to about.
Exactly.
Like that. So that's the alternative.
Yeah, that is a very special relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know you have lots of resources, and we are going to share those in the feed on the Facebook, this live video, but also we'll share it on the YouTube video. And if you're watching or you're listening on our podcast, just make sure you go to our YouTube video, and that's equivalent, and you'll find those resources there. Our podcast channel just doesn't have the space to put all that, but I will share your slide link on there, and so they can find those there as well. So, but as we wrap up, is there anything you want to close with? This has been a great conversation. I've sure enjoyed all that you've had to share.
Just thanks for inviting me to share this with you. It's just an interesting field. I think we're going to learn a lot in this next couple of years from different researchers, and I'm just interested in it. Hopefully be more people interested in it now to help advance the knowledge and to make it easier for young adults with autism, and even the others who have maybe emotional difficulties. There's a lot of
lots of anxiety,
even the depression disorders, bipolar. So just to help people live a better life and more fulfilling life. And I think it's maybe a little piece of the puzzle, but hey, if you all work together, we can make it happen for more people. So.
Yeah, and if you want to connect with Erika too, we've got your site, for emotive learning. If you want her to help you put together some lesson plans on how to work with your young adult on getting some of these skills and say, I'd really like somebody to help me. Well, that's what she does. So,
Yeah.
So I'll make sure to share that link from our website as well, because she's one of our partner organizations. So definitely take advantage of those resources. Well, thank you so much, Erika.
Thank you.
I appreciated your time and your wisdom, and just how, like you said, you made this practical. And oftentimes we get studies and all these other things, and we're like, oh, what does that look like? And how do I apply that? And you did a great job of showing us how to do that. So thank you so much.
Welcome.
Yeah. Well, we're going to continue this topic of communication for still 2 more weeks. And next week, we have Dr. Miriam Blank back with us. And I know everybody enjoyed her so much last month that she's going to be back talking about, though, enhancing language for all children with autism. And we were talking about reading comprehension last time, but she wants to talk about language in general. And so we're going to be doing that. And so that'll happen here next Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central. And so we'll see you then. But we want to keep this conversation going. So make sure you join our support group here on Facebook and join into that conversation. We're talking about homeschooling and special education all week long. And also check out our website at spedhomeschool.com. We've got lots of resources on there for you. And we appreciate your support. We are a nonprofit. And this broadcast, as well as all of our other outreach, is supported by viewers like you. So thanks, everyone, for joining us. Thanks again, Erika. And we'll see you all again next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Yeah.